Brown University and the author of Madre, Perilous Journeys with a Spanish Noun. Leaping off the page with energy, insight, and attitude, Liza Bakewell's exploration of language is anything but just semantics. Why does me vale madre mean worthless, while que padre means fabulous, she asks? And why do 100 madres disappear when one padre enters the room, converting the group from madres to padres? Thus begins a journey through Mexican culture in all its colors. Weddings, dinner parties, an artist studio, heart-stopping taxi rides, angry journalists, corrupt politicians, blessed virgins, and mothers both sacred and profane. Along the way, a reader discovers not only an invaluable lexicon of Mexican slang, to be used with caution or not at all, but also thought-provoking reflections on the evolution of language, its winding path through culture, religion, and politics, and not least what it means and what it threatens to be a creative female, a madre. Please welcome Liza Bakewell.
Thank you so very much for coming, for inviting me to the introductions, for this amazing, I had to take a picture, these graphics. I feel honored. I love having students in my audience, and I guess that's why I'm a professor. But on a book tour, you don't often have students in your audience, so this is a special, very special moment for me, and I hope in turn it will be for you as well. What I have in mind, and anyone is welcome to interrupt if they have something else in mind, is to read you 5 very short sections of the book, and in so doing take you on a journey, take you on the journey that I took in a way in writing the book, and that will take about 20 minutes. And then for the rest of the time that we have, I'd like you to take over and direct where you want the conversation to go, and we can have a dialogue so that the writers in the audience can ask questions about writing, the English majors can ask questions about reading and English, if there are language majors, and so on and so forth. So I hope you all will take the opportunity to participate in that process, and I look forward to hearing your questions, because that's how I'll get to know where your interests are. So without much ado, what I'll do is I will briefly connect these 5 sections together, but I'm not going to say anything until I finish the first one, because it's the introduction to the problem, which was alluded to in the introduction. So I'm in the very beginning of the book. I'm on the first page. And it's February 23rd, 1987. Before I met Armando for dinner, I hailed a cab. I told the driver to head south in Insurgentes, right on La Paz, up over Revolucion, and into San Angel, then onto Juarez, later Hidalgo, and from there I directed him street by street, right here, left there. We turned on to a side street and into a neighborhood of salty, white, and sandy brown homes, with lawns trimmed and polished as fine as I remembered, as I imagined, the proprietors themselves. High adobe walls bordered these green oases, wrought iron gates opened on occasion to let their owners in and out, as well as visitors and the occasional glance of a passerby. The neighborhood was interspersed with garbage-collecting empty lots whose crumbling urban walls struggled to maintain their separation from the street. On one of these, someone had sprayed black paint freehand into large, unstylized letters, "A toda madre o un desmadre," floating it over the parched, craggy surface the way graffiti does everywhere in the world, only this was legible. A total mother or a dismother? I tried to decipher it. I'd already heard in the short time I'd been in Mexico City some extraordinary expressions with Madre in them. Me vale Madre was one of them. What did it mean? The literal translation is where the mother meant nothing to me. Worthless, someone told me. Worthless? I asked, perplexed. Yes, someone else reiterated. As several others explained to me, the expression can be applied to just about anything. Relationships, the government's rhetoric, the economy, the rise in random violence, dinner last night, the movie I wasted my pesos seeing. I'd never heard the expression in the Spanish classes of my college days, but when I first heard it shortly after arriving in Mexico, I held it in my hand as I might have held a strange insect. I studied it. I sought to locate it in a field guide to idiomatic Spanish insects, but to no avail. Then someone translated it for me, from one kind of Spanish to another kind of Spanish. From the literal, it's worth a mother, to the alley, it's worthless, or I don't give a damn. I was even more baffled. Also around this time, I was introduced to its counterpart, the expression, which was just mentioned, which most of you probably know, que padre. Literally, it translates as, what a father, and is said with exclamation, but figuratively, it means how fabulous, marvelous, awesome. Madre is worthless and padre is marvelous? I asked around. Yes, friends and acquaintances responded, followed by, well, más o menos. And so began my journey with Madre. So that introduces the book and the subtitle of the book. And what happens is, back in the late 80s, when many of you were being born, perhaps, I think so. I can't see you at all. I'm trying to see you. Hopefully during question and answers I'll get to see you. I was busy doing other things. I had to do research on a dissertation which concerned contemporary Mexican politics and art. And then after that, you know, I had to get a job. And that always seems to get followed by kids and mortgage payments. And I don't know, the list. But all the while, I was going back to Mexico constantly. I just had a lot of friends, and I was writing articles on Mexico's teaching on Mexico, so I would go back maybe 3 or 4 times a year for over 10 years. And during the process, of course, you're speaking Spanish, I'm gathering a list of madres, and always kind of jokingly asking folks, could you explain this to me? Could you translate this to me? And it was often difficult to get people to help me out because it wasn't ladylike back then. Still isn't ladylike, actually. So now I have gathered a list over the years, and I need help with it though, because I'm not living in the world where these madres are spoken freely, and but I'm doing my best. And I meet someone and become very close friends with someone who works at a hotel. And I take my list to him. And I'm now in a chapter called Mixed Messages, and almost 15 years later. Well, I said to Alberto, waving a sheet of paper that reached the floor, aquí están las madres. Here are the mothers I've gathered. He chuckled. He never thought I would take him up on his offer. Hey, whenever you need help, stop by, he had said, smiling. It was quiet at the hotel this day, and well, why not? So I plopped my list down on the counter. What I saw, with his help, were 4 knotted heaps into which the madres fell. There were the ugly and useless ones, the fierce, fiery, scary, and violent ones, the whores, and the sensational and totally awesome ones. My list wasn't complete, Alberto pointed out, but it would never be complete because slang is organic. It grows and reproduces, dies and decomposes, and then pops up again, reincarnated into something else. Who knows how long these madres have been around? Obscenities, some scholars say, are as old as religion. Others say as old as our vocal tracts. And taking it back even further, some primatologists claim they are as old as all the great apes. this, I told him. I just needed an impression. He laughed. I guess he thought, given the length of my list, the impression I had was longer than most men's around here, or women's for that matter. Under ugly and useless madres, and with Alberto's help, I put me vale madre, and plain old madres, or gay madre, or ay madres, said with a dismissive voice, you're mad, when life isn't going just right, when you've had some bad luck, when the motorcycle you were repairing still doesn't work, said the way you might say daily, when things are breaking instead of mending. Along with the ay madres were está de poca madre, or simply de poca madre, literally of little mother, which means in this case, great, because it's unique, singular, happened by itself, with little, if any, mother involved. Then there were the little madres, the madrecitas, the nothing madres, or whatever madres, like, pásame esas madres, pass me those little nothing whatevers, pointing to the salt and pepper in the middle of the table, the paper clip on the corner of the desk, or the pen on there on the floor. Or you might say, I didn't believe this story, me, madres, not even a little, or someone didn't complete his or her job but handed it in anyway, and you, her co-author or boss, say, she didn't give me what I asked for, me, madres, or he gave you only madres, nothing at all. You expected a lot more out of him than that. Or maybe you were asked to do something, join an exclusive club, or you were too afraid to ask, thinking you didn't stand a chance. Either way, you requested puras madres, nada at all. And there are the madres that might be used to refer to something that you don't care about, but you must do it, like your homework or the dishes, changing a diaper. I have to finish this madre, even though I could care less about it. Y la madre, and the mother, and so on, etc., etc. So that's just an example of one of the knotted heaps into which these madres fell with Alberto's help. And we went through the other three as well in this chapter, which I won't do here. So I want to give you a little taste of various chapters. Eventually what happens is I sit down to write about these madres, and I find myself, of course, always with the question, why is it in Mexico there are just so many of them? Because, of course, around the world, including in the United States, in the English-speaking world, in the States, there are the your mamas, or your mother's ugly, or your mother wears army boots. We have our share. And every language, almost every language, not every language, does. Every culture, every society. But Mexico just has so many, and I really had to answer the question, how come? But I also had to ask larger questions that concern just Spanish, and not necessarily Mexico. And so I wanted to know if there were gendered sensibilities that were out of balance in the language generally. And of course, grammatical genders were always, having learned Spanish as a second language and as an adult and as a feminist, I just was always like, why? I suppose I would have said the same thing had I learned English, but anyway. So eventually I end up with grammar, just Spanish grammar. And I'm going to read just a page and a half from a chapter called Lost in Los. And I will describe the rest of the chapter to you as soon as I finish this first kind of general entry, much of which will be very familiar to you Spanish speakers, first or second language, third language. But maybe some of you out there, it will be new. When Armando, now Armando is someone you meet in the book. He's a very good friend of mine. He born and raised in Mexico City, many generations. And he and I became very good friends, and he was very, very loath to talk to me about these madres because it wasn't something an educated woman should be doing. And but little by little, I eroded that resistance within him by just pleading, you know, I'm an anthropologist. I wanted, this is my work. And so little by little, he finally gave me some information. But right now, we're reminiscing. When Armando and I were reminiscing on the phone about the extravagant wedding we attended, on my desk in front of me was a giant diagram of the relationships he recalled. I put the padres of the bride up at the top beside those of the groom, and I had noted who they were, the web of relationships that extended out from them, and why the press had come to cover their children's wedding. Below them, yet extending out in all directions, were the first, second, third, fourth generations of this and that relative. The drawing lacked the right angles of a kinship chart, and looked instead like a winding road map of connected parents, godparents, and offspring, all living in the paved parts of town. The padres of the bride? I asked when I looked up and out the window of my office. It was the pest in me. I knew that padres in the plural could mean either fathers or parents, fathers and mothers, but to this day when someone says padres, I first hear fathers, then I hear and mothers, if the context suggests that. It may only take a split second, but I always do double take. My daughters don't. They assume fathers. There's no double take. I know because they always ask, what happened to the mothers? That's a good question, I think, because grammar doesn't just mean grammar. It also means a can of worms. Take the two basic rules that concern Spanish nouns referring to animals such as humans that make it possible that padre, the word for father, can mean father and mother, both in the plural and in the singular. The rule for the plural, Juliana Parra explained to her students with their books ajar when I attended one of her classes in a Salt Lake City suburb in March 2006, is to use los, the masculine plural, whenever there is more than one being and one of the two or more beings is male. Women and girls, madres and amigas, doctoras and abogadas, doctors and lawyers, gatas and leonas, cats and lions, and the like by themselves are all las. However, those same women and girls are found inside los, the masculine plural, when there's one or more els, or males, accompanying them, so that one male doctor with one or more female doctors defaults to los médicos. It's the rule, with some exceptions. Hearing that triggers my thinking. First, I picture 99 mothers dashing together into a building, plumes reaching out of their hats, purses, and scarves. They sit down, cross-legged and upright. They're somewhere in Mexico City or elsewhere in Latin America or Spain. The lights dim, sequence, flicker, and flutter. A woman at the podium welcomes them. Bienvenidas, amigas, in the feminine. There's laughter, clapping, and stomping. The auditorium fills with the sounds of women's voices. The speaker is well known to everyone there. From that scenario, I conjure a man. He walks into the back of the auditorium. He removes his hat and coat, finds an empty seat in the back. Perdón, the woman speaker says, bienvenidos amigos, in the masculine. Las 99 amigas plus el one amigo resulted in los 100 amigos. But the padre hadn't even a quorum, and yet he conducted business, I blurted out with Juliana by my side. I'm afraid so, she sympathized. Then she handed me a textbook after we walked back to her office and directed me to articles and exercises she had written for her students. That chapter goes on for a little while more in that direction, and then it turns to inanimate, the inanimate world, so desks and chairs and so forth. Although I don't go that direction, I stick to things that are related to the word madre. I don't want to take on the whole language, but I'm curious that in history of Spanish books and classes, and also in class, what you learn when you ask, well, wait a minute, what are these grammatical genders? How do they come about and so forth? Well, the received wisdom that I got was that they are arbitrarily assigned, and that they come from the Latin, and that it was ending, the Latin ending, sounded masculine or feminine according to what was becoming Spanish at the time, because Spanish comes out of spoken Latin. It then found itself assigned to one or the other. So if it ended with an A, as many Latin masculine words did in the plural, they ended up being feminine words and so on. But, so inherited from the Latin is the received wisdom. But I wondered about that when I looked at words like love, sex, marriage, pregnancy, childbirth, and birth. So el amor, el sexo, el matrimonio, el embarazo, el parto, el nacimiento. I thought perhaps there we might make an argument, I did make an argument, that grammatical genders might not be so arbitrarily assigned, because after all, it's not that satisfying an answer that Latin is the reason for the assignments, because of course it begs the question, well, what happened before the Latin, right? And what happened, of course, was the rise of property. At some point, over 10,000 years ago, we people, cultivating. And then we started owning land and owning roads and so forth. And we wanted to pass these down, and inheritance patterns that were passed to Rome and to Spain and to the United States were patrilineal, so father to son, right? So that was my argument there. I won't say any more. So that was my Lost in Place. And then I even at that point decided to leave Spanish altogether, because I've already gone back to Proto-Indo-European languages and times, and that just encourages me while I'm sitting and, you know, pondering these ideas in front of my computer, to go back 100,000 years, 10,000 years. Well, let's go back all the way to the very beginning of us speaking. So what happens there is, I'll just introduce the chapter called Sounding It Out. And of course, I just try to stick to this one word. There's 60,000 words in this book. They're all about one word. It's a good word. So in Sounding It Out, I'll just read the first page and a half, which gives you the introduction. I'll tell you a little bit more about it, and then I'll one more reading, and then we'll open it up. So bear with me. So I live in Maine. I don't know if that was in the introduction or not. And I would have come here last night, but really bad weather. Tornadoes and so forth in the south. But anyway, I could have said I came there from there this morning, but that's not what happened. Anyway, I live in Maine, and I go back and forth to Mexico. And on my return from a summer in Mexico to a fall in Maine in 2008, I spent many evenings sitting alone on my living room couch with the fireplace warming the cold New England October air. It was a perfect time to pause and feel where the layers of gutters, grammars, and sharp-tongued poetry break down to a core where only basic sounds remain, because sometimes simplicity is the best route to take while stumbling around. I was getting closer to understanding Madre, wasn't I? The truth is that I really wasn't sure, because of a catch. The more I learned, the more I felt like Ariadne. I threaded together conversations, thoughts, revelations, which were providing me with a guide out of my confusion, but I remained in a labyrinth with some really big, airy dilemmas. I decided to pause, start with the sound M, and add soon enough an ah, making it simple. Ah. And something happened. I found the first sounds of the word madre comforting when they were separated out from the word, apart from its grammatical gender, and disengaged from its cultural meaning, sitting there all by themselves, sounds, pure and simple. Endings seem to be all tied up with agreement and disagreement, dominance and submission. but not beginnings. And the syllable ma. Say it when my girls wouldn't go to bed, or to friends later, and any lucky soul who came through my door in my office, a classroom of students, and especially the stream of Latin American friends who visited us in the fall that year. A few days and weeks later, I did this to every other person who came into my life indiscriminately. I considered it my way of getting a random sample. Say mama or mama, with or without the accent, and they did. Now say it again. Mama, 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 very slowly. Ma, just like that. Ma. Let the sound take you in its arms. In the beginning of the word Madre is a baby's vocalization. Ma, ma, ma. Not the first one a baby will make. It often, but not always, follows several weeks of ka-ka-ka, pa-pa-pa, da-da-da-da. But when it comes, it's never just nonsense baby babble, but meaningful sound production. Ma, ma, an etymological history repeated in the life of every speaking infant over the millennia. And that chapter goes on to explore the origins of the word, of the sounds, and the biological nature of many of the sounds that we put in our languages, we speaking humans. Each language has its repertoire of sounds. No language uses all of the sounds that any human is capable of producing, but gathers a repertoire that gets repeated in the vocabulary that it creates. What's astounding is that around the world, the child's word for mother almost always uses a nasalized sound. So if it isn't M, it's N or ing. And it's a sound, it's the only sound that humans can produce while nursing. And that there's a very interesting debate that Socrates and Hermogenes engage in via Plato, who wrote the debate. It's called a dialogue, actually, 2,000 years ago, plus some, in which Socrates takes the position that good words are the words that have these direct connections to their reference, such as the one I just suggested. He doesn't talk about mama or papa, for that matter, but other words. And that's his argument, which I take. And in linguistics, we tend to get rid of anything biological. We like to think of language as purely human, with no, because once you connect us to a biological world, we're connected to other animals. And linguistics is not like that, my field. And at the very end of the chapter, I do talk about papa, because it too has wonderful, papa, it's a great sound. I'm not going to read that now. So then what happens is I have to come back to Mexico. I have to, leave the 2,000-year-old dialogue, leave 100,000 years ago when we're first starting to speak, and come back to Mexico. And I do it in two ways. I first come back to the church, which of course is not only Mexico. There's 900 million Catholics, and Catholicism, my understanding, hanging out in Mexico and other Latin American countries, Catholicism has an enormous impact on language and on Spanish in particular, in this case. So I come back first to the time that Spanish comes to the New World, and I spend a lot of time in churches at weddings, because rituals to an anthropologist are the jewels of our field work, our research. Research can occur anywhere depending on how you define what you're doing and the questions you're asking, but it almost always involves ritual. So weddings, of course, are a wonderful example of ritual. And what happens in ritual from a linguist's point of view is that the language used in ritual is almost, it's essentialized. It's as pure as it can be. It is only the language that's necessary for the ritual. It doesn't have any you know, as our everyday language does. It's been honed down. And so I find it's a wonderful place to look at Spanish. It's a wonderful place also to look at the word mother. And even for you non-Catholics, that's probably obvious, of course, with the Virgin Mother. So I go to a lot of weddings, and now I'm in a chapter called Back to Church, and it's the last section I'm going to read. And I'm at a wedding. And I'm, in my mind, thinking about the 16th century, when Cortez and so forth came over and brought with them, of course, Spanish. I was about to drift back to the 16th century again when the organist struck the first chords of Mendelssohn's Wedding March, popular since Queen Victoria's day, although not initially among Catholics, and with them the wedding began, pure music that brought the entire congregation to its feet, as those descending chords are apt to do. It was our cue not only to stand, but also to gaze upon the bride, who had begun her way down the aisle, accompanied by an older man, her father and uncle, a godfather, and older brother. I didn't know. She was who everyone had come to see, the crown jewel of the marriage ritual, a living Virgin Mary. Her porcelain face was framed by a misty veil. Her youthful hands held a dozen roses. Her wedding dress expanded out from her waist into halos of white lace and satin, which floated down into soft clouds of puffy white sunlight behind her. She glided by us, radiating a smile upon us as she made her way to the altar where her fiancé awaited her. I realized there was no need to transport myself mentally to the 16th century. I was there already by being inside the Church of Santo Domingo and witnessing a Catholic wedding, an outward sign of inward grace instituted by Christ and described in full in the Council of Trent's 24th session of 1563, Doctrine on the Sacrament of Matrimony. Ever since churches were first built in Mexico, young couples have wed in them, although not in this one, as it was part of a monastery rather than a parish during its early years. Oh, there had been interruptions like the War of Independence, and there had been modifications, like wedding dresses were not white back then, and Mendelssohn had not written his famous march. But overlooking those, I was at this moment linked to the very beginnings of both Spaniards and Spanish in Mexico. And what came to my 20th century mind was this, la boda. The word for wedding in Spanish derived not from nuptiae, the word for wedding in Latin, but from votum, vota, a promise to a god, a solemn pledge, a religious engagement, a votive offering, a vow. Vota, converted to Catholicism and carried forward into time on the wings of Spanish. To my mind came these three words as well, La Virgen Madre, followed by flesh, breath, life, spirituality, enriched by her sensuality, the sight of her presence, the sounds of her procession, the smell of her roses, the touch of her grace having an impact on the linguistic experiences of her parishioners' lives. And with that chapter, what happens to me in my journey with the writing of the book is how much Spanish and Catholicism are twins. They grow up together in Spain on the Iberian Peninsula. Churches are being built, these huge, beautiful churches are being built during the time Spanish is evolving, well, the Latin is evolving into what becomes Spanish. And no matter what your faith, you cannot speak Spanish without these deep roots in the Catholic Church. And I just found that very interesting. Eventually I have to go back to the state and back to Mexico itself, because there's lots of Spanish-speaking Catholics that are not Mexican. Why Mexico? Why is this? and I end up with the state. And I won't go on because I want to make sure we have time for questions, and I don't know how much time we have, but I'd like to open it up to all of you for any questions at all. Maybe have some lights come on so we can see each other. Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so when you do raise your hand, if you could just speak up, or maybe you have an extra mic. I don't know. Well, why don't we? I'll repeat the question. Okay. Yes.
It's a very interesting book. How the whole journey with just the one word involved. What inspired you to write this book?
So did everyone hear that? What inspired me to write the book? And thank you for the compliment. What an interesting journey. Well, two different things inspired me to write the book. Since this is a writer's conference, I'll answer that as a writer and not just as an anthropologist or a linguist. Actually, to be perfectly honest with you, since you're all young, and maybe you already know what you're going to do in your life, but I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do until about 5 years ago. I just kind of went along, but I realized that when I was your age, I really loved to write, but I didn't have the courage because you have to read your writing out loud to your fellow students, and there was no way I was going to do that. I didn't have the confidence to stand up and know it. So I didn't. So I just buried my head in anthropology, and that seemed to work out okay. But then, you get older, and you think, well, I'm not going to live forever, and I really, really, really want to write. That's what I wanted to do for a long time. But of course, in my field of anthropology, and the academics in the audience will relate to this, we live in a publisher-perish world. So we have to publish in order to get promoted or keep our job. But I'm not talking about that kind of academic writing, which I highly regard. I have no disparaging comments about it. It's just that I'd done it enough and I didn't want to do it anymore. And it really wasn't. So that's A, part A to your answer. Part B part is I found that the word Madre in Mexico evokes an enormous amount of laughter. And it's funny. It's also perilous. It's also dangerous. If you say it at the wrong place at the wrong time, you can be, you can get yourself into trouble. Or in my case, the gringa, asking these inappropriate questions. I would sometimes be met with silence, and I knew, I said something wrong or it was inappropriate. I always took notes, though, because that would inform me that this word was not to be used there, or and so on. But many times it was really, really funny. And academic writing can talk about humor, but it doesn't often produce humor in its writing. So it's more third person. And you might say, this was funny because, and you parse it out. Well, that's about as unfunny as you can get. So I really wanted to bring the humor and the danger into the book. And I thought there was only one way to do that, and that was in the writing style itself. But the way the book is going to be written will carry a message as much as the message inside. But the message is inside both the rhythm of the prose as well as the vocabulary and research that was gathered to support it. So that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah.
Sure, stand up. I'm going to hold this.
How you feel?
Yeah, and we always use that term Madre, and sometimes we kind of giggle. But my question is, now that you brought up that point, should we correct it as we go through with our children, or should we just leave it as it is because it is what it is? We are who we are. As an anthropologist, do you believe we should correct it?
Well, the question is, I grew up, I'm speaking, what's your name?
Alejandra.
Alejandra. I grew up using the word madre, you know, because you just grow up speaking the language. And, but now that you pointed out to me, she didn't use the word sexism, but there's this imbalance. Should I change my use of the word, and should I raise my children with an awareness of this? Well, first of all, I'm humbled that you would even ask me for advice, because I just feel, a lot of times I just feel like such an outsider, since it's not I didn't grow up with the language, unfortunately. That's why you heard my accent. But as a feminist and as a linguist and someone who's very aware of gendered aspects of language, and also what happens when you actually try to change language. So I'm just going to back up and answer your question by first saying, A, speakers always have the last word. And by that, you can imagine a dictionary and how these dictionaries are revised every so often, like every other year now. And you see that it will, you know, the new Random House dictionary will come out and it will advertise 10,000 more words. And you think 10,000 more words? Because we're us speakers, we're always adding and subtracting and playing with our language, and we will always have the last word, not the dictionaries and not the grammarians. So our use of language has an impact on how language. But then there's the question though, can we consciously change the language? Because language is deeply rooted in society. It's more reflective of society than society is reflective of it. And so it is a two-way street. Once language is developed by society as a need, you don't have a lot of words for snow unless you're an avalanche expert or someone who lives in an area where you really need to understand the conditions of snow. Otherwise, you know, I'm sure if you're from this area, you probably don't have a really advanced vocabulary for snow the way we do in Maine, because we just need it more to describe driving conditions, skiing conditions, and so forth. So societies create their languages based on need. And that also, by the way, I believe includes grammars, even though that's been out kind of on the side of the discussion. But can individuals change language? Or do individuals have to wait for the whole society to come around? Since language is reflective of what's going on in the society, it really is very difficult for an individual or even a group of individuals. And you may all know in a form you can fill out or check if you're a woman, Miss, Ms, or Mrs, right? And that's because during the feminist movement, there was a conscious effort to get forms to include an equivalent to Mr, which didn't evoke or describe someone's marital status, right? Ms is for anyone, married or not, whereas Mrs and Miss are not. And that was a conscious effort, and that's about as far as the feminists were able to go with language change. Society had to come around, and it did. So I do think that the Madre expressions, and they get worse, I only read that first pile, are reflective of an ambiguous relationship to mothers. And one that comes out of putting mothers on such a pedestal, where mothers are so worshipped. Mother's Day is coming up. If any of you are from Mexico, I didn't have to tell you that Mother's Day was coming up, because it's a really big deal in Mexico. But it's not great to be on a pedestal, because you don't have a lot of direction over your life when you're up there. And I think little by little that pedestal is getting eroded in Mexico, and we will see an erosion of these. On the other hand, the rise in violence in Mexico evokes these, because a lot of the madres are so tied into the anti-government sentiment that it may be that they continue because of the violence. So with my children, Well, my children are a hopeless case. You know, they're growing up with a linguist who's a feminist and they speak much better Spanish than I do because I have this terrible gringa accent. But, yeah, I know. There's no hope, though. I really tried to get rid of it. It's not going anywhere. But now, you know, will they use the Madre expressions? They might, because they hang out with a lot of Mexicans, you know, and it's kind of part of their repertoire. But, of course, if they come to my house, I don't know. If they say Pasanes as Madres, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know.
I don't say that. I hear our mom say it, I'm just like, you know, but it doesn't go past that. But I don't want my children to hear her say that.
Yeah. Well, you definitely can influence your children. You know, brides help. Do you know the word madrazo? Yeah? It's a punch, but it's like a really bad one. Madrazo. You could say, I'm going to give you a madrazo. No, that's not a good idea. That's not my advice, really. Seriously. So another question? Yes.
As a feminist, were you offended or curious by the meaning behind the word madre? And like how it was compared to the word madre? Expressions?
Okay, as a feminist, was I offended by the word mother? And then what was the second part?
Curious.
Or curious? Oh, yes. I was so, well, when I first went to Mexico, as I noted in my introduction, and heard Mi Madre and Que Padre. I mean, I really had to hear the Que Padre before I understood, oh, wait a minute. Que Padre, you know, wow, awesome, it's used all the time. You can use it on television. FCC of Mexico doesn't, you know, go beep with Que Padre. You can say in front of the president. It's completely, it's like saying that's wonderful. But Madre, there's not one Madre expression you could say in front of the president. It just would not be appropriate. Even a toda madre, which is a total mother, or like awesome, or there's various different ways to define it, but you know, basically awesome is kind of equivalent to que padre, except it's not appropriate to say in polite company. Although I think feminists are going to change that. I was a combination of I was mystified by this because I went to Mexico with the stereotypes that I had learned about Mexico, which is, well, at least in my case, my baggage was Mexicans love their mothers, and they worship the Virgin Mary. I mean, well, maybe not the Virgin Mary, but the Virgin Guadalupe, right? And that's basically what I arrived with, along with a bunch of history and so forth. But I had that idea, and so when I heard Mi Madre and Mi Madre, I was like, wait a minute. I was told before coming here, you guys love your mothers, you know, and this just brought the house down. I mean, everyone thought that was the funniest thing. And people, I find, around the world, including myself, love being taken out of their autonomic nervous system, if you will. Their everyday, automatic life. So we speak, we walk, we breathe without a lot of thought about it most of the time. But when a non-English speaker, we have a lot of foreign students living in our house. You know, I mean, they come one at a time usually. But, and often I'll say some expression in English, and they'll say, wait a minute, what does that mean? You know, sick as a dog or something like that. What does that mean? And I'm, oh, I never thought of that. So my friends in Mexico had a great time with me, and my acquaintances, lots of taxi cab drivers, Alberto, who I became friends with at the hotel, had a really great time actually reflecting upon these expressions that they had used without any thought. I don't think most Madre expressions, they come out of a society that has produced them, but they don't necessarily continue consciously, right? They're just expressions. But they do reinforce the society from which they came, but in kind of a quiet, out of consciousness way. And so my friends loved thinking about what it actually really might have meant originally before it just became everyday Spanish. And I found that really exciting. As a linguist, I wanted to also contribute to my field, not just write a fun book, but also contribute to various arguments that are in the field, two of which I alluded to. The grammatical genders coming from Latin, and they're arbitrarily assigned. I wanted to say, I don't think so, and this is the evidence that I'm going to marshal against that assumption. So each chapter I tried to also contribute to my field. And it was a great, I think everyone should pick a word that they find curious in their lives and write a whole, if not book about it, an essay on it, and find the entire world inside that one word. There are words in your lives. They may not be big words like mother or madre. They may be a word that's just particular to you. You've had some experience with it. And by examining it, you open up a whole world. There was a question down here. Yes?
I'm just curious to explore any further, like the vanity or curse words involved with Madre.
Did I explore the curse words involved with the word madre? Yes, absolutely. In mixed messages, I read las meses madres and madrecitas, the useless nothing madres. But there were three other heats that I mentioned, one, the whores, and so forth, and the fiery, scary, violent madres. And they just deteriorate. I didn't choose to read it because I wanted to kind of take you through the book, but I also didn't choose to read it because some of them are really offensive. And less so to me because I'm not a native speaker, and when you swear, it's just so much easier to swear in your own language. Have you noticed that? No, you guys don't swear. But I do know what it sounds like to hear swear words in your own language. So sometimes they're a little like, So they're not always appropriate for a session like this. But oh yes, oh my gosh, the entire book. In fact, my daughters, they're not the best PR people in my life right now because they tell everyone their mother wrote a book on swearing in Spanish. Like, could you up it a little? But yeah, I became a complete pro about every single swear word in Spanish. So, any other questions? Oh yeah, I'll go.
What initially sparked your interest in Spanish language pursuing your research?
Yeah, why did I have an interest in Mexico? And of course Spanish and all the things that go along with it. I think you guys could all ask yourselves right now, and if we had time, we could go around the room. What are your passions in your life? What interests do you have? And then back up a little. How did you even get them? Where did they come from? And sometimes they're just so random. Or maybe they're not random, but they feel so random, So when I was a kid, my parents took me to Mexico. All we did was cross the border in Nogales in Arizona. But I just remember eating a tamale. I don't know. I think it really was the food. I got it right here. I know. But I really love the food. And so I think it really did start with that. And then, then talking to people, well, how'd you make that tamale? And well, lay that underway. And I somehow made a whole career out of it. But I'm not a very good cook, so I could never write a cookbook. But, yeah. I find, to be a little more serious, though, that at some point when I decided what to do for my dissertation, I was always very curious about the relationship of Mexican artists to the government after Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and the other muralists. What happened after? Because we spent so much time focused on them. And they had this interesting relationship with the government. And I kind of was curious, well, what happened after that? It seemed like a doable project. You have to kind of be practical, too. So part of it was that. But once I got to Mexico City, I realized I really, really love the sense of humor at least my Mexican friends and everyone I ever meet. There's something, Mexican humor is very funny. I don't know, it just really gets me. So let's see, there was another hand.
Would you agree that language fosters sexism in our society?
Yeah, you mean English? In English?
Language in general.
Languages anywhere. Languages that, do languages that have sexist, linguistic elements, do they have an impact on the society and thinking and so forth? Yeah, that's a big, big question, because in the field of linguistics, many years ago, in the 1920s and 30s, even before that, when Native American languages were first being studied by non-Native American speakers, mostly speakers from Western, like English, French, Spanish, whatever. What they discovered was the languages were so radically different from anything related to Europe, to any Indo-European language. And this caused the question, do languages have an impact on the way we see the world? Because it was discovered around that time that, I'll give you a couple examples, that in Navajo, many words that are nouns in English are verbs in Navajo. So the word tree is a verb. Now, that's one example. And then another example is in Navajo, there's many, many noun classes. So what we call grammatical genders, the la and the el of Spanish or French or Italian, the Romanesque languages. In Navajo, they have many of these classes. So liquid, solid, cold, hot, so forth. And you've got to learn to categorize everything with these many noun classes. And then there are other languages that only have black, red, and white to distinguish all colors. So the color of a leaf gets categorized. So it was, well, do they not see the colors, right? So this has been a debate for many, many years. And the bottom line is that language does not determine the way you see the world, but it does have an impact on the way you see the world. So going back to an earlier question and answer, it's a back and forth relationship, but speakers ultimately have the final say. So language itself doesn't have a final say, but speakers create the language, right? It comes out of our experiences. And then once it's out there, we use it to describe our world. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes, but I say it with some caution.
So basically, language comes from how society. Your language is a reflection on society. It's just the description of how society sees the world.
Yeah, it's difficult because now our societies are so big and they're so complicated and they're so multilingual. But if you just take English, since it's the dominant language in the U.S. at the moment, its structures and its vocabularies have a deep, deep history, right? They have a Proto-Indo-European history. But as it's spoken in the U.S., it also has its particular U.S. Flavor. And that is in response to the society that has produced it, absolutely. In fact, I may be wrong, and maybe you have a better thought on this than I do, but English is, we all know English is the language used in business around the world. Well, one of the things that English offers to the business world is the ability to say yes and no very, very clearly and decisively. It may not be at that any given moment clear and decisive, but it can be. It's very hard in many languages to be clear and decisive with the word no. it's very hard in Mexico for Mexicans to say the word no. And I think it's partly reflected in that, no, see? See, no. But also in negotiations. Yeah.
So you would say that that might be correlated to the capitalist views that we have in American society?
Yeah, I definitely think, so is that related to capitalism? And I absolutely think that capitalism has played a very big role in the formation of English, as has Protestantism. Absolutely. Weber wrote about the impact of Protestantism on the way we see the world. He didn't talk much about language, but he could have. English, in that case, yes. And Spanish is very, very Catholic. But English is very, very Protestant. And then you can go off from that with some research. Yeah?
I'm just curious, how long did it take to finally write the book, the research, and traveling back and forth from Mexico to get all the information you needed?
How long did it take me? Well, it's a really good question because I pondered this perplexing situation of Que Padre Me Vale Madre for almost 2 decades, really. But I didn't decide to write the book until 5 years ago, and then I sat down. Now, you know, I have kids, I have a job, and so, and your life, you know, my dad was very ill while I was writing my book, but in between those, that's why I'm a bad cook, actually, because my kids live on hot dogs and hamburgers. I know it's terrible, but, and tamales, we're in Mexico. But, yeah, it's hard, but when you're driven, I'm sure you all have had moments where you're driven. You know, you're gonna fix that motorcycle, or you're gonna do something, and you have homework, you gotta get to class, you gotta feed the kids, you gotta take care of mom, whatever it is, you still figure out how to fix the motorcycle, right? You just find the time to stay up late. And that's what happened with me. So it took me 5 years within, you know, the interstices of my normal chaotic life. Yeah, I would love someone to say, here, you know, here's $100,000, sit down and write a book. Boy, that'd be wonderful. But that's not going to happen. Yeah.
This question is kind of significant and related, and I don't mean to go off subject, but I'm just very curious. What is your ethnicity, Madre?
What's my ethnicity?
Yes.
I pretty much look it. I know. Although this is kind of bottle blonde. I used to be very blonde, but then I had kids, and I don't know what happened. Then my hair like went black, or went kind of gray, black. Well, you know, gray too. So I try to wash it away. But no, my probably mostly German and English. My last name is Bakewell, and a lot of people throughout my entire life, I mean, to this day, will say, "And do you bake well?" And the truth of the matter is, it has nothing to do with baking, my name. It actually has everything to do where the water wells were in England. So imagine in England that's unpopulated, and you're on horse, right? You got to know where the next water well is. So there's Stockwell and Bakewell. These are all towns in England. So that's where the Bakewell part came from. But my mom's side of the family, they have funny names like Oakley and Woodhouse, and Bloodsworth was her mother's maiden name. And what I found is most all of them represent professions or places. I used to say, in answer to your question, I used to say, but I wanted to be nice to you, I'm an ecosystem. Because it's really, I think, just my family had a lot of professions and they got named after them. But I'm British and German, probably. But I swear to God, somewhere there's a Mexican. Because it doesn't show up. But it does in my absolute craziness for Mexico.
Perfecto.